welcome to another episode of Ton's 2 Cents podcast. Today's conversation is with someone who hasn't just been a part of the GovCon ecosystem, she's helped to actually shape what it looks like today. I'm joined by Joanne Woytek, Program Manager of NASA SEWP. And this isn't about retirement discussion. This is about perspective. What actually matters, what industry still gets wrong, and what it really takes to compete and win in today's environment. Joanne, thanks for joining us with us here today on our podcast. And for those of you who don't know you, which I'm surprised if they don't, you're the program manager over at NASA SEWP for one of the most widely used and respected contract vehicles in government. And over the years, you've built a reputation for creating something that actually works in government, not just something that just checks the box. And I think what stands out to me is your perspective. You didn't come up through just one lane. You've seen this space from both the technical side and the acquisition side. And that I think that combination really shows up in how you think and how you lead and how SEWP has kind of evolved over the years and decades. So if I could say, and you've been someone who's really willing to kind of share your perspective more openly, and whether it's through your work or your writing, which I'd love to dig into more, which isn't always commonplace in GovCon. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So welcome to our podcast, and please say hello to our intellectuals and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm always pleased to try to explain myself. As mentioned, Joanne Woytek. I have been a part of NASA since 1977 and have had a wonderful career here in both, as you mentioned, both the technical and acquisition world, but still from the technical point of view in many ways. I just am very happy to be here to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to marry the two sides, which gives you a very different perspective. And so I'm super excited about this conversation, and I know that our intellectuals will get a lot out of this conversation too, not only into the mindset of how professionals like you operate in this space, but also we're going to try to give our intellectuals a little bit of understanding of how to be successful in this environment. But before we get into like all the details of this conversation, I would just love to get to know you just a little bit better, because, you know, if someone who knows you only from your professional role would meet you outside, let's say on the metro somewhere or doing your shopping at Whole Foods or whatever, what would surprise them most about you?
Well, when I first saw that question, I was thinking more of the people who know me and don't know me that well, because one of the most surprising things people learn about me is that I'm 100% introvert. I've had people go, "No, you talk all the time. I'm on podcasts. I do this," and just knowing the big difference, that I am totally happy to talk one-on-one with people. And totally not happy to be in a large crowd trying to do the networking and all that. It's a very different vibe. So that really changes things for I think how I understand myself and understand where my strengths are. I think that's important to do. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think what I would classify you as one of those amiable introverts that I think you are probably maybe a little bit more comfortable, like you said, like not only on a one-on-one, but maybe as you know the person better or as you know the organization better. Because I've seen you feel very comfortable and, you know, like in certain environments and around certain people. And so, yeah, it's very difficult to come across that you were, you know, like an introvert.
So the definition I've heard that I really speaks to me is that an extrovert gets bigger as this crowd gets bigger, and the introvert gets smaller.
Ah,
And just
okay. I
watch me in the
have
crowd.
not heard
You
it
see me
described
go
that way.
smaller and smaller. Yes. Yes.
That makes absolute sense. And so today, intellectuals, you're seeing two people from very opposite sides, because you are totally right. The bigger the environment, the bigger the crowds, the
Mhm.
more I'm like, on top of my A game. So yeah, I'm a total extrovert. So, and I guess in Myers-Briggs, I'm an ESTJ,
I'm
for
an
those who are keeping
INTJ.
track. You're an INTJ. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
There's a lot of overlap for us. It's
yep.
just the extrovert, the introvert part. So,
The other
no,
thing,
that's,
the other thing, just before we lose it, you mentioned my, my dual career, tech and acquisition, but I really feel that my career has had one real strong stream across it, and that from the day I walked into NASA has been customer orientation. That everything I've done, every work I've worked on, with meteorologists, with supercomputers, with data, eventually like it all, and then with acquisition and soup and and getting contracts running, what's driven me and the people I've worked with is how can I best make this work for the customer and understand the customer, and not it's not driven by the technology, it's not driven by policy, it's driven by customer, and then figuring out how to mold those. And I think that's that is a theme again that started in '77 and has continued throughout my career, and I think has been a big part of my success.
yeah, I would totally agree. And I think that is just very helpful and insightful advice for, I think, anybody who works in any industry, that it needs to be customer forward. It needs to be that servant leadership, that you are here in service of the customer, in service of that mission. And so I think that's intellectuals, that is a mic drop moment here, for all of us to kind of take forward. So I would love to start to kind of unpack that a little bit in our first segment, which are the moments that mattered the most. And I think everybody sees you in the role, as the role, the results, but they don't always see that path that it took to kind of get there. And I think whether it's you, a company, or anybody else, and I think in this market, how you got there usually shapes how you lead and how you make decisions and what you prioritize. I know that I'm a very different person because the path that I took, and my path is very different from other people. And so I don't want to say baggage, but I have very different life experiences and some, challenges that maybe other people haven't overcome. So what pulled you into this space, and really kind of what kept you here for a very long period? Because in this industry, people come and go very quickly sometimes, and it doesn't make sense. It's sometimes because it's because of political appointments and different things. Politics rose into a lot of what we do here. But what really kind of pulled you, and what kept you here?
Well, what pulled me here initially was NASA. That's how I got here in 1977. um, and and what's kept me here is in some ways NASA. Even as we talked about soup in the program, the yeah, you mentioned the mission, the customer, the the problem solving, and the freedom that NASA tends to give compared to maybe other agencies and even companies um, to find your, if you're doing well, that you can find a way to do well and find a place for yourself. So I've been able to navigate many different areas within the agency, all around the same basic pieces. Initially with the technical and computer world. I was asked to be a part of the SEWP program as just a help to go to one meeting, and eventually, got more and more involved. In fact, I was just looking at some old printouts from the '90s when my name isn't even on anything because I was too low in the totem pole. But eventually, because data was part of what we were doing, and I'm very much into data and database and how to convey information to customers. I started doing side work for my supercomputing. I think it was basically, I was in the supercomputing world at that point, and just started putting my own database together of how the soup might look in the '90s. Soup kept growing, and I just thought, I was a little naive. I thought, I could manage this. What do I need to know about managing? And so in 1999, I asked the group that we ran it as a group if they would let me take over as the program manager and be the first program manager, assuming that I could get a promotion and to get somebody at NASA to support that. And that's how I got here. It was just I was working on it. I was doing some technical problem solving with, with the data, with the group, getting more and more involved. It just felt, I could do this. I couldn't do it. I was not a great manager at the beginning. I had to learn a lot, and fortunately, people, who came on board stuck with me, and I think I've become somewhat better in the what is 26 years since.
Yeah, I think we all kind of start that way, that youth, that hubris. Um, I know that there was a moment similar to yours where I had a manager pull me aside and said, you know what, you could be a really great program manager if only you would do X, Y, and Z. And one of them was you need to listen more and you need to change how you speak. And I thought to myself, what? Change how I speak. And I just thought, because you're in your 20s and you're like, well, this is just me, take it or leave it, that type of brash kind of attitude. And now that I'm in my 50s, I go back and I look and I think about it. I was like, wow, yes, that was probably the most uncomfortable discussions and comments that someone had with me, but it was really something that kind of stuck with me, right? That it is something that if you're able to communicate properly, and if you are, you're so much more effective in whatever it is that you do.
Yeah, for me, and unfortunately, I did not have. I had a good mentor and friend when I got here at NASA, for the technical and also just life in general. In the 90s and as I moved into the soup as being the program manager, I really did not have that feedback. So it took me a little bit longer perhaps than it would have. My biggest lesson learned was I came from the technical world. I thought everybody thought like me. Everybody could just, I could just act to them like I would act to me and everything would be fine. And I found out that people are different. And it took a
Yeah.
while to learn that lesson that you have to, treat people as they are. And that the most key statement I read and really stuck with me since then, I think has really molded me is you can't change other people. You can only change yourself.
Yeah.
And that was a hard lesson for me to understand because I thought, oh, I could just make everybody be like me and the world would be perfect. And the world
Yeah.
would be really
So
horrible if everybody was like me.
it
So,
would, right? Like, yes, you have to embrace everyone
yes,
with where they're at,
yes,
how they are, and just kind of, let go sometimes, and
yes.
and trust that, we're all there for the right reasons. But you mentioned something about your technical background, and I think that's what's really so interesting because as much as you and I are different, we're still very similar in some regards. I have a technical background,
Mhm.
and so I've got a dual degree in chemistry and political science, and I think my technical background has really played a critical point. Now, do I use chemistry today? Absolutely not. But I think there are certain disciplines about being in a technical or a scientific background and training and education that really kind of shapes and is able to help you either manage or operate, in a more effective way. And it really impacts how I see things and how I critically solve. So, how do you think your background kind of shaped how you approach soup? Because it sounds like you were working and formulating soup, very early on, and you had very big ideas on, how the program should go.
Oh, so mine is physics, not chemistry. My degree's in physics, and so it wasn't. I got into the computers to help. Again, this goes back to customers. Why did I come to NASA? I was asked to come here to learn how to program, not because I knew how to program, because I knew
Uh,
science, and I knew
yeah,
how the scientists would think, and so I could write. The idea was that I could learn how to write programs to support scientists, which turned out, I think, to be a pretty good decision on their part, and I was really wanted to work here. So I have the scientific background, and what I the the piece that it's what drove my technical success because I did have a lot of successful times and places where I've worked. is also, I think, is just similar to what is driving SEWP. Is I love to solve problems. Um, and even the management question, my growth in management came about when I realized, oh, management is just a question I have to answer, a problem I need to solve, not something that has been solved, not something that I
Yeah.
will find a final solution that solves every piece of the puzzle. That ooh, if I just do this, everybody will be perfect, and the world will sing, hallelujah or something. It's more a case of, oh, now today I have this problem. Today I have this program I have to write. I have to make this computer do something. Okay, that's programming. Now I have to take a program, a set of contracts, and with people, and the people have different goals, and now I have to figure out how to make them successful. Well, that's a problem I have to solve. And to me, what I have is an intuition of how to get to a solution. Not always right. Sometimes it's wrong, as my staff would probably say, more wrong than right, but it always heads in the right direction, and gets us to a piece of the solution that gets us to the next question, that gets us to the next problem. I just love the problem solving. It excites me. It interests me to have that in front of, and to have a whole, a set of these uh, people, the set of the contracts, the industry piece. There's so many pieces to the puzzle here, that are always something new to
Yeah.
try and learn and improve upon. And how can I make this better? How can I make it better for the customer? How can I make it better for the staff? How can I make it better for industry? Those are all questions that are problems to be solved, and that's the driving factor that permeates throughout my career.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, and I love the puzzle analogy, because I kind of think that GovCon is like one big puzzle, and they keep adding pieces to that puzzle. When you think that you've put together a puzzle, there's one more corner that you've got to find and put together. So, um, I love how you describe that. So you started talking about soup, and I really do want to kind of, it's like the big elephant in the room. We can't not talk about it, but I really want to move into like our next segment, which is talking about market reality, soup and the GovCon landscape. And there's a lot of noise in the market right now about new vehicles, consolidation discussions, and this is not the first time we've heard or discussed, because GovCon's kind of like a pendulum. It swings one way and then it swings back another way, and so priorities are constantly shifting, and it's really easy for companies to get distracted, to chase all of these different signals that may or may not matter, and knowing how to read the tea leaves, and how do we interpret this, and what does this mean. So as soup moves into like this next phase, which I think is, um, you know, very interestingly different, what should industry realistically expect and being paying attention to at this point?
Well, that's a pretty broad question. Um, so let me take it from, I assume let's take it from the soup, where soup is going. There's also the whole GovCon and all that, and that's a whole, to me, another world. Um, I, I don't see, I know it may seem to some people that we're making major changes. Soup has evolved from day one, and I'm the last remaining person from day one of soup on staff. So it's been around a while. And we've always tried to keep moving ahead with where our customers are and trying to determine that. Um, the, the biggest challenge in working with, to me, one of the biggest challenges here is, every company wants to succeed. Every company thinks they want to succeed. Sometimes they think they want to succeed just by magically getting a contract and getting money. Other companies want to work to succeed, and some just, and if they do, I think they can. I think the first question any company has to ask themselves is, what are you doing to succeed, and what are you willing to do? Because you're not going to be handed as we always say, you come into here to SEWP and you get a contract. You don't get a bag of money in exchange. You get a contract. To make that into something, you have to then do a lot of work yourself. Be willing to put that into the system. We're going to have a lot more companies in SEWP 6 because of the reality of how contracts and RFPs and proposals and protests work nowadays, and what the purpose of an IDIQ can be in today's world has evolved. In the early days, we had eight companies with a contract in SEWP 1. Kind of a few more than 8 in SEWP 6.
Only 8.
And we were and it was a single award contract. So every contract was a single award contract, not a multi-award. And that was our goal in SEWP 1, was to be single award. And since then, and it's in the RFPs itself. I think in 5 we specifically called it out. Our goal is to be multi-award. Competition is much more important. The ability for companies to participate. Our own, from the government point of view, because there's a government part to this, and from my perspective as a government employee, I need to be aware that because we have been so successful, that if we set up a gate, it needs to be a gate that is clear as to who participates and does not participate, and to not just make it arbitrary. We're only going to allow 50 companies in, and well, why not the 51st one? Is there a good reason to have that? So we really tried in 6 to make it a very clear. This is the type of companies we want. If you're this type of company and you can give us a proposal that shows that, then let's let you play in the field. Doesn't mean you're going to get any awards, any orders, but it does mean that you have an opportunity to then prove yourself.
Yeah. Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head too, right? It is that companies need to still do work. I think a lot of times contractors feel like it's very difficult to get on some of these vehicles. And if you look at it at the end of the day, getting on a vehicle is now easier than actually winning work on the vehicle. Whereas I do remember, earlier on in my career, it's been 20 some years now, that it used to be very difficult to get on a vehicle. That if you got on it, it was like, you've got like the whole, this holy grail of, of a contract that you could be really successful on. But I think industry too has gotten really sophisticated. I think there are new entrants all the time with new technologies, new solutions and things like that. So I think the industrial base is a bit more sophisticated now, and it's more diverse. So with that said though, like, how do you think how should companies kind of interpret like all of this noise that we're hearing around the GSA consolidation, and where do you see SEWP kind of fitting in? Is it you against GSA? Can we cohabitate and live in a world together where there's some overlap, but we can harmoniously operate in the same environment?
I believe that's the goal. Harmoniously, and collaboration is a big word. We are much more in touch with them. We've always have been. GSA has always been one of our biggest customers. And we continue to support them in that way. We are different in our philosophies, and that's good. You can't have one philosophy of how to do something. It just isn't the way the world works. And there are some definitely different ways to operate, and we have one, and they have a different way, but there is overlap, and so that collaboration is good. And where that takes the NASA and GSA down the road, that's will probably be decided long after I leave. But it is it is a I think the main piece is we want, and we certainly know from OMB that the goal is to understand that SEWP plays a major role, and it does so because of many factors, and we can't let that not happen, because there are just too many customers. We're the only contract outside of GSA that every agency uses, And I always say it's not that they can use, but every agency
Yeah.
does use SEWP. Um, okay, going back to the old paper back in the 90s, like we have 28 agencies using us, and now we have, that was big news, and that was before we were everybody. But even in the early years, we were used by a lot. Now it's every single agency. So if we're not successful, it can and successful in providing the customers and industry what they need, um,
Right.
then we are not doing a service, whether it's as a collaboration with another agency or support. We don't want to be. We've never looked at it as being a competition against another agency, another contract. It's a competition of ourselves to be better. It's always been focused on that.
Mm-hmm.
We only exist um, because we serve the customer, and that's not true of every activity.
Yes.
Certainly in the government, some things exist because they need to exist. Some things exist because there's a law they exist. We only exist to serve the customer. If we don't do that, then there's no reason for us to be here. And we recognize that as a clear driver of how we operate.
Yeah. And that's a great driver, and it's interesting as I'm listening to you speak. I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, I have the same philosophy, but at the same time I'm super competitive. So I'm like, I come from this whole mentality, I'm going to take over the world. And I'm up for that charge. So it's a dangerous place in my head sometimes,
Well,
in
I
that
don't want to
battle.
I don't want to sound like I'm not aware of our position. I've always felt that, but what drives if you want to call it competition, um, what drives us, the SEWP staff, the SEWP program, is not competing against that other person, but if I am doing the right job, I get to grow, which means I get to hire and
Mm,
do more technology, and I get to be better. And
yes.
it's a growth, it's a competition, competing to get myself better versus competing to make somebody less. So
Yes.
it's how you look at that. We are very,
Well,
I never expected to be 12 billion a year. We never went into this with that as our goal. Um, but we're happy to be there because we are able to try new ideas, try new ways of working with our customers, with industry. We're always tinkering with how to best to use our staff to improve the experience for everybody. So if we weren't successful, we wouldn't have the money to do that. That's the fact of life, because we are only driven by what we um, get from the contracts. So it's a feedback mechanism, I guess, is the key.
yeah, no, absolutely. It makes absolute sense. And I figured there was a little bit of like internal competition there. So, and it goes back to your underlying theme is being able to serve the customer, and be serving of that way. So you started to bring up a couple things that lead us into our next segment, which is about innovation and how the government buys. I want to talk about that a little bit. And I always say that I was born in the wrong decade, because like every decade just keeps getting better from a technology perspective. And we're seeing this, I feel like it's just this huge surge of innovation right now entering the federal space, not only your personal life, but also in like our federal space and the GovCon space, especially for companies that didn't come up through GovCon, which is something that I love, and I'm also a little wary at the same time. But proving value and actually scaling in this market are, I think, two very different challenges. Um, so, are we making it harder than it needs to be for innovative companies to actually scale in the federal market, or has it become easier?
So this we might have a slightly different view on at this point with this. I don't think it's the job of the government to be innovative as a whole. The job of the government is to um, uh, create it to fulfill its mission, and whatever that mission is. The goal of the IRS is not to innovate how to how to do taxes. It's to make sure we get taxes paid and get refunds done. And so we always have to be careful of where the innovation occurs. Now NASA, of course, is innovative because that is part of our mission. So there are some agencies where that is their mission, and that fits. And there are certain pockets within, the Treasury. I mentioned IRS, so the Treasury has its pocket of innovation, but they're pockets of innovation. In the end, the most important question industry has to answer is how are you going to help fulfill the mission in a way that meets the budgetary constraints that might exist, and those are the realities. And if you are innovative, where are the innovative pockets to work within, and then prove that you are solving the mission. And eventually you have to prove that, because we don't have most of the agencies are underfunded, despite what some people think, underfunded, understaffed, and struggling, and trying to fit in with all the policies and everything else that's going on. They just need to get that computer. They just need to get that software, that network, to operate so that they can get their mission done. And we can get distracted by trying to go after the next fancy thing when that's not the part of that mission. So we need to. I worry about that. I always worry about modernization too. Like, I've been around for.
What are we modernizing?
Yeah, we are constantly modernizing. We have modernizing forever, and it's always a bad thing to have computers that aren't modern, or you have to modernize. But if it's getting the job done, what has to happen? There has to be a reason to update what you're doing, and because there's also too much infrastructure already built in that is working. The fact of the matter is, the government works. Not always. I'm having a little problem with some forms right now. I'm like, so I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but overall, when you consider how much we do, we actually work pretty well, and we get a lot done in the government. And I don't think I think too often people pick out, they have somebody still has COBOL or Fortran or some language out there. Well, but if that language is working, why do we have to change it? Oh, they aren't using this new technology, or this innovative technology. Well, is that innovative technology really going to solve it for me? Or is it just something that's cute? So I would caution any company to, in any part of industry, what is it that you are providing that will support the mission, and the customer? If you can't answer that, you can be as innovative as you want, but it's not going to be useful to eventually for us to purchase.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a really good point, and we talk to our customers about this all the time when we discuss solutions and really understanding the customer. What is their mission? What are their hot buttons? What are their pain points? What's really going to resonate with them? And I think it's easier sometimes for companies, especially if they're like tech focused, to focus on a feature of whatever their product is, or what or service or whatever, and they don't really focus on like the outcomes and the value that it brings and what problem you're trying to solve. And I think I wrote a blog on it one time, is that value over importance. In a world where everybody thinks everything is important, it gets diluted in the conversation if you can't articulate or explain or convey what's the value in that. And so not every agency values or needs innovation or a solutions or a SaaS product or whatever. They have different problems to solve. Now, you happen to work in an agency where you're always pushing the envelope on, new innovations and new technologies and things like that. So that's, that would be where, if you are a tech company or a innovation company or someone who's got this, like new crazy whatever solution, that NASA would be more open to exploring or discussing that, so long as you say it fits the mission of that agency. And I think that gets lost sometimes when we talk about innovation and who buys what. and who you're selling to. You really need to focus on, it is about the customer in the end.
So my favorite story, one of my favorite stories, I have many favorite stories, was in SEWP1. We only had, as I mentioned, eight major
Yeah.
companies. Actually, I think there were 11 altogether, but eight of the single award, and one of them was a real-time satellite company. And
Okay.
they thought, oh, and they innovative at the time, major company. I won't name names here, and they were doing no sales, and they finally hired a consultant, and I know they spent a whole lot of money on this consultant who said maybe sometime you should go down to Johnson Space Center and talk to the people. And that was like a major light bulb. Oh, they're just going to
Yeah.
come to us and ask for our solutions. And that has stuck with me as a lesson learned about what industry needs to do. You need to come to the customer. Don't come to the customer to tell them what the solution is. Come to the customer to
Yeah.
hear what the problem is. That's the first step.
Yeah. That is so critical. And I know that um, GovCons really, they painfully try to figure out what should be in their presentation, what should they say, who should bring. And I always say, keep it simple, stupid. You need to come in there with a couple of open-ended questions, targeted questions, like intelligent questions, not what's your mission, what are you doing or what's in your pipeline, but come in and say, hey, we've noticed this, or we see that you're struggling with this. Tell us more about some of the obstacles. What are some of the solutions that you've tried? What are you looking to accomplish? Like having more of those dialogue, solutioning type of discussions, I think are so much more important. And that's kind of what we talk about in industry, about shaping and really understanding the customer and, the opportunity. That it is harder. I think some agencies are easier to get into and have those
Mhm.
conversations than others. So again, not everybody in GovCon is as open to some of those conversations.
Yeah, I think the other part to recognize is um, if you do have a solution, how many other people have solutions around the same answer? And
Yeah.
I just came back from RSA, the big security conference, and I always say when the first time I went there, I realized just how crazy it is when a company says, "Oh, I can solve your IT security problems." And at RSA, if you don't know, it's not you, but the
Yeah.
uh, listeners don't know, it's the major conference center in San Francisco. Takes over the entire conference center, both exhibit halls, all with the answer that will solve all your problems. And if you need two exhibit halls for the answer, there's no the answer to find. So what is it? What is the answer? What is the question? I think
Mhm.
has to happen. And then how are you going to be different from the other person? And then how are you going to work within the competitive environment that government requires? We do have rules we have to play by, and contracts like SEWP, and the schedules, and how they operate, and then the GWACs at GSA. We provide a framework that helps that situation, but even within that framework, you'll still have to find ways um, to deal with the competitive nature of the world. There's
Mhm.
going to be other companies selling something else, so you can't just walk into even if you had the thing that the answer for me. I
Right.
can't necessarily buy that answer if if somebody else can explain that they have an answer somewhat similar. I have to then compete it and then decide and go through all that. So it's not. It's just the way the world is. It's not. Nobody's trying to keep somebody from being um, you know, selling their technology, their answers. It's just that there are rules that we have to follow and processes we have to follow.
I always, it's nothing personal. It's just business in the GovCon. It's any other, given Tuesday in GovCon. So absolutely. You started to talk a little bit about like all the different vehicles and how to acquire some of these services. And so I think that's a really great segue into our next segment about some of the hard truths for industry. And we've laid out some of these for our intellectuals here today, but there's literally no shortage of activities in this space, whether it's technical events like RSA or association opportunities. And there's always an opportunity or a new contract being let out all the time. So GovCon pipelines are full. Their BD and capture teams are super busy. I know, depending on, we're into Q3, proposals and RFIs and source of thoughts, MRASs, they're spiking. I actually have an article that's coming out tomorrow about my love-hate relationship with RFIs. And so, companies are bidding and they're chasing opportunities like every day, like every minute, every hour of every day. But, a lot of this activity sometimes doesn't always translate to results. There's no guarantees in life or in this industry. And I would say it's even more difficult in the GovCon industry. So, what do you think is the biggest thing that industry still gets wrong when it comes to competing and winning in this space?
Um, I think it goes back to knowing the customer, and knowing what is that you really want to get done, and knowing that you're going to have to work for it. I remember being at a conference and somebody walking up to me saying, "Oh, I sell janitorial supplies. And I understand there's lots of money in IT. So how do I get a soup contract and then I can make lots of money?" I'm like, this is not the reason to get into the IT government world, because it's far too competitive. You have to know what you're doing, and you have to decide. I think one of the biggest questions to ask is how general are you going to be? How specific? Um, and the more general you are, that gives you more opportunities, but then you're competing against more companies, more specific.
Yeah.
Well, now you narrowed it, but if you don't win that one requirement, are you stuck? So I think um, there's a lot of churn that goes on in terms of how many companies are out there. We're certainly going to see that again. Soup 6 is going to have quite a few contracts, quite a few companies. I will say with Soup 5, every company that got a contract had at least one order. Um, there's 140 companies, so we were very proud of that, and that occurred within the first few months. Now, that in part is because we worked with them and we're able to. It's going to be a little harder with so many. So it's going to be the ones that put themselves out there. If a company just has one person and thinks that they can sit there on the computer, and we even asked in the RFP and had some pushback, how are you going to handle 100 RFQs a day? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, because that's how many RFQs come through Soup every day. So if you don't, and you don't, it's not that you have to be able to respond to everything that comes in, but if you haven't thought about how am I going to prioritize, how am I going to decide which one fits my where
Yeah.
I'm likely to win, where I do have something that distinguishes me from another company, whether it's a price point or or a capability, or preferably both, you can then have a chance of winning. So you need to have a plan on how to take that all in. That's just within Soup, and then as you mentioned, you have other contracts out there. As much as we'd like to, and we certainly have, because of Soup, because of the GSA, GWACs, there are at least some major requirements that only go through that funnel, which is our goal, is to kind of have as much as possible go through one or two of the funnels, and not 50, 60, 100 different funnels. You're still going to have agencies that think that their requirement is special, or they just want to have that contract for their own, whatever the reason might be. You're going to have to pay attention to those, but you do also want to make sure that you are paying attention to the GWACs that still exist, because we do a fair amount. And my expectation is Soup 6 is going to be doing as much as we've done now. We easily could do 50%, 100%
Yeah.
more in Soup 6,
Yeah.
because we added services. So don't miss that opportunity to learn about that, um, and about the similar ones at GSA. What are those? What are the major contract vehicles that aren't GWACs? Pay attention to those too. But you may find, again, if your company isn't ready for that, maybe you should be just working at a single contract at a time, trying to find an agency that fits where you can learn. To think that you can come into the government world and not have ever done a contract with the government and immediately become successful with Soup is just crazy. You need to know the government. You're not going to be successful unless you know that there are policies, that there are procedures, that there are competition rules. That how are you going to fit that, and how are you going to learn about it? Find support out there. I know there's lots of consultants out there, and that can help. It's not, there's no single one answer, I guess, is the bottom line.
Yeah.
It's a learning experience, and then finding your own strength.
I think you hit something that really kind of struck with me, and it's something that it's one of my personal philosophies, is that in a world where everybody wants to be a generalist, and like you said, like I'm an IT company, we provide IT solutions. Well, what does that mean? Like IT is so broad. It's kind of like now saying, oh, we're an AI company. Well, what type of AI? What part of AI? And I brought up the AI specifically for you in this conversation because I know that you and I have had some AI discussions before about that. And I'll give you a second to kind of, respond to the AI comment. But it is really true is that I think companies are hesitant to really have a niche service or a niche capability. And I think that's something that is so attractive that the government is really kind of looking for. Does that mean that you can go after some of the larger, bigger, consolidated type of contracts? No. But that just means now you have to, like hone in and develop your collaboration and your teaming skills. Like nowadays, and we've seen the pendulum swing from, IDCs, individual awards, to big mass consolidated type of contracts to, these big GWACs and BICs and things like that. And some have grown bigger than what they should. Um, and to the death of SP4. We won't be grieving that anytime soon. But you are right in that we need to kind of work together to solve some of these problems, and everybody kind of plays their role, finding and determining what role you're playing. I think is so critical, and I think that really kind of is what separates a lot of these vanilla companies, as I like to say, from the companies that are really kind of successful.
Yeah, I had a occasionally I'm often a cynic, and sometimes I swing the other way and I'm way too optimistic. And for Soup Six, I was sort of a little optimistic at how we try to structure the RFP to get companies to focus in on their strengths. And we
Yeah.
still got lots of companies saying, "Oh, we do everything." I'm like, "No, you don't," because no company does everything. Well, so what is your strength? And it's very hard to get a company to only focus on that because they're afraid of missing something. I understand why, but I'd hope that we could find a way, and still hope that maybe, and we'll continue to, and have folks still thinking about how can we showcase the strengths of companies without every company saying, "Oh, I do everything." So that's always a problem that to be solved. Um, I would also say that one of the strengths of Soup, that particularly in Soup 5 and is carrying into Soup 6, that will help in if we can get this to be well understood by both industry and government. I think government has latched onto it already. Is what we're going to be calling storefronts in 6, which allow agencies to themselves decide where is their requirements key on. If they
Hmm.
really care about networking, we'll have a networking storefront that you build upon and work with industry to get the solutions into that. So as much as being a generalist in the industry world, the problem with IT in the government world is that that's also a generalist. What do you
Yeah.
mean you want an IT contract? What do you mean? We get people asking questions that are unanswerable, like is everything on Soup FedRAMP compliant? It's like no, that's an impossible possibility. But you think
Yeah. Please
IT,
don't do that. Right.
yeah, and so how do we specialize that thought process? And that's one of the, we go back to innovation. One of the innovative areas that Soup has really focused on over the past, yes, I said in Soup 5 and 6 is how to specialize for the agency what they want, so industry can then give the solutions in those areas, and that's what we call it. It's a much more than what I'm able to spend time on here, but watch for that, especially as we build upon that. I think it's been a growth part of agency usage that will be more so in six.
I think that's going to be so important. And I love the fact that you're moving, towards that, because I think there's not a lack of opportunities out there or organizations that can help the government solve so many problems. But the government needs to be able to tell us and articulate, what exactly is it that you want us to try to solve. And being very general about, some of these requirements is very challenging. So, as much as we can get the customer to articulate that, and I think we're seeing a lot of that with a lot of the NRASs and the sources SOTs and the RFIs that are out there, is that the government is really kind of hungry for some of that, but there needs to be kind of a delicate balance about how much do you ask in that, in that phase, versus, now you're talking about some really detailed solutioning that we're not going to do for free. And it's a lot of work for industry to kind of like do that. But again, we literally could talk about that segment for another hour, which we don't have. So part two of our conversation needs to be a follow up on that once SEWP gets awarded, which I would love for you to come back and do that. But
sounds good.
Our last segment here is, I always love to end our episodes with like the what's next. What's on the horizon and what's next for you. And I think after spending this much time in the GovCon market and seeing it from, multiple angles, I think you've got a really great perspective that doesn't go away. And I think that, it evolves and in many cases becomes like more valuable. So as you look ahead, what kind of impact do you still want to have in this space? And what's next for Joanne?
Oh, I'm really hoping that six proves to be what we've hoped it would be, which is a place agencies can come to, customers can come to, communicate with industry, their needs, get build up storefronts, build up strategic responses, and it's not so much that there's a goal of how much work goes through it, but that anybody who can use this will want to, and we will give a reason to, and we'll find success in it. I have really high hopes. We have a wonderful staff that I feel can carry that on, and it's part of why I've made this decision to leave NASA. It's a transition time, and eventually you have to transition in your life in one way or another. And I feel like now's a good time with the staff we have, with the plans we have for six. Hope to see it be awarded. Everything points to that happening before I leave in October, and it will get started, and then I can leave behind a growing, wonderful program with the great staff and great customers and industry teamwork that we've put together. So that's my grand vision for what happens here. And then personally, I try to avoid the word retiring because I do not want to retire. I want to, I feel, I mentioned I love solving problems. I love the challenge, getting up every morning and not knowing what's going to happen next and what issue I'm going to have to resolve, and then giving it an opportunity to do so. It excites me, it interests me, and I think I'm pretty good at it. After this many years, I feel I've proven it. So I'd love to find an opportunity to help solve it outside of NASA, and with obviously with industry. I don't know where that's going to take me. I don't know if we're but I'm hoping it's there. I'm hoping that there's something out there that will both not so much interest me, but somebody will find me interesting to help them solve that.
Oh my goodness! If no one finds you interesting, then you can always give me a call. We'll take the show on the road here. It could be the Joanne and Ton show for a
Sounds
while.
good.
But yeah, and to be honest, I've always been very critical about certain things, but I'd like to think that I'm fair. And I do love how SEWP has kind of evolved. I wasn't on board initially, Let's just say, like I'm a born skeptic, but once I'm on board with something, I can advocate, till the cows come home, so to speak. So I do love how soup and this industry has kind of, evolved, as we've matured, as problems grow and change, and different things like that. And I think that's, you're leaving like a really incredible legacy. And I do have to agree, your staff is going to be fantastic, and I can't wait to kind of see where it goes. Now, for the intellectuals who don't know or follow you, I do recommend that they connect with you on LinkedIn, but you have a blog.
Yes. I have a personal blog. It can become less personal after I retire, but as long as it's personal, I don't have to go to lawyers to do it. It's just part of the push. But also, I just enjoy it. It's called Rhino Talk, RHINOTALK.blog. You can probably just look up Joanne Woytek blog and you'll find it. I'm not going to try to explain rhinoceros here. Check it out. There's a whole link on the blog page, the first page about why rhinoceros. You can explain that. But it is. I started several years ago. It goes through many of my thought processes. Talks
Yeah.
about my personal history, how I got to where I am in that regard. A little bit more professional came up just in my last blog. Talked a bit about my thoughts as I enter this next phase. I enjoy writing. I hear some people enjoy reading it, so I'll keep going as long as that is true. And I'm happy to have anybody send questions to me. We don't have time to talk about every aspect of my life here, but I'm always willing to talk with people about what you'll find there and what you'll find in the more professional, soup area. I can't talk as much about that, openly
Yeah.
while I'm in the government, but certainly I can talk about about my experiences in my life, and that's
Yeah.
my main outlets for that.
Yeah. Aren't you proud of me for not even like bringing up the who, what, when, where, and like timing for Soup Six? So like I stayed away from all. I was on my best behavior, here today during the conversation. But no, I love that you're using your blog as this creative outlet, and so I think that's, um, I use podcast and my interactions with, because I'm an extrovert, as my creative outlet for being able to get my thoughts. And so that's the whole reason why I name my podcast Tons Two Cents. I know that it's not a term that I came up with, people use it all the time, but it's really kind of caught some fire here that, I have people saying, oh, well, Tom, what is your 2 cents? But and I think it's kind of important to have, those outlets to, be able to kind of do that, to show your personality, to kind of show your thoughts. And I'm thinking, if it gets to this point once you retire, like I think you should publish the Rhino Diaries. Like that would be that would be fantastic. Like the Rhino Diaries, from your blog.
Yeah, there's a lot of material there now. When I go back and look, I realize just how much I've written. It is just like, and I will say for those who, there is a little section where I kind of pulled out like these are the main ones to go to. So you can actually don't have to go read all of them. But if you really want to get a good glimpse, I think there's like 12 altogether that I picked out from the past. I said read these, kind of the essential ones,
Yeah.
and then you decide where you want to go from there.
It's like the highlights. It's like the Cliff Notes version of your blog. If you feel like you want to read the rest of it, that's a great idea. I'll have to. Um, we do the best of, episodes, episodes for our podcast, because I get it. Not every episode is going to resonate, with all of our intellectual listeners, because GovCon is so diverse. But it is nice to kind of do a sampling sometimes of, different episodes of segments that I think are interesting, and just kind of mash them all up, for, a quick listen to. But as we wrap up today's episode here today, I want to say that, this was not meant to be a conversation just about soup or contracting vehicles, or, how acquisition works, but it's really about like how the market works, how we all operate in this industry, and what still needs to kind of, be adjusted. So I think some of the things that kind of stood out in our conversation is, that longevity comes from building something that adapts. And I don't want to use the word pivot because I think, pivot gives a different connotation, but we need to, I think, evolve along the way, not only personally, but also industry and agencies in general. That there's also a disconnect between how innovation shows up and how the government buys it. Not everything has to be innovative. Sometimes, the government does and buys so many different things. Sometimes it's just keep the lights on, keep the planes up in the air, different things like that. So innovation doesn't always show up and need to show up all the time. And I think we've also acknowledged that, industry sometimes can spend too much time reacting to a lot of noise. GovCon is very noisy. There's something going on all the time. I have to make myself not get onto LinkedIn sometimes because once you start reading, all of a sudden it's like you've blown the rest of your day. And so that's kind of a challenge. But at the very end, though, this market is still a very relationship driven type of market. So conversations like the one that you and I are having, conversations with a government buyer, I think are just so important, more, just as important as it is to understand what's in the president's, proposed budget for 27. What does GAO write about? What do other, experts in this industry talk about? So, but it still comes down to getting to know the customer and having these thoughtful conversations. And so, Joanne, last parting thoughts on this conversation here today and what you want our intellectuals to kind of take away.
Oh, that was a great summary. I think one of the pieces I always tell industry is speak up. Don't think the government knows the answer, or that they think they know the answer. Oftentimes we have to say like we know it because that's the way we're forced to work. But if you want to respond to what the government asks for, but you also want to make sure that we know what's really true out there for your part of the industry. And if we ask for something that's crazy, don't stop from saying, well, that's just crazy. And I've really pushed industry several times in the past few years for some crazy things that the government has asked for. And unfortunately, they haven't spoken as much. I think it actually has been more speaking up of late about some things that I'm glad to see, because it really helps us understand the government. Where are we? What are we missing? But do it in a way that's respectful and understand, and not trying to sell your product, but sell what industry can provide government as a whole, and then you can talk about your product from there.
Mic drop right there. Speak up, industry, but speak up in a way that is constructive. Could not agree more with you. And so this really concludes our episode here today. And Joanne, I think this was a wonderful conversation about, a lot of different topics. We covered a lot of different bases about what actually moves the needle and what still needs to kind of be done. And I so much appreciate you sharing your front row seat in all of this with our intellectual listeners here today, to kind of help them better understand how to be effective and successful in this environment. And I welcome you back for part 2 anytime.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it and be happy to come back anytime.
Super. I want you to come back after you retire so you can really spill the beans and spill the tea on a lot of different things. So we'll do that over drinks next time.
There we go.
There we go. Well, thanks to our intellectual listeners for listening here today. And remember, you have to think big to win big. Be an intellectual. And until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of possibilities.